Hello everyone, welcome to Thyris Web Development Tips and Tutorials YouTube channel. This is where I create some tutorials sharing some tips that I have found useful during my journey. I am Shruti Valasa, a full stack web developer, a mentor, a course creator and now a YouTuber as well. This is my fourth webinar in the row. Every Wednesday 6:30 p.m. IST is when I plan to do a webinar. And today's webinar is all about, learn to master CSS layouts. Sorry, that was the next slide. Never mind. So this webinar is not going to help you master CSS layouts like right away. You won't be able to do that immediately after 45 minutes, but it's going to show you a way to do that. An approach, some tips, some hacks. That's what I'm planning to share with you during, through this video. But you will know what to focus on, what to avoid, and so many such things. So let's get started. First thing, like you already saw, I love CSS. How about you? Let me know in the live chat below. CSS is very different. Unlike so many other programming languages. Of course, CSS is not a programming language is the argument, but never mind. That apart, CSS is very different because you can get started with CSS very easily, and you can even build complete websites even if you just know 5% of CSS, and you won't feel the need to know more. But the actual challenge comes when a design is presented to you, or somebody has designed something on Figma or Photoshop, or you are faced with a challenge that the client wants something exactly looking like another website, or you're in a team and you're a front-end web developer and you're presented with the mock-up. That's when the challenge appears. You will not, you'll really start doubting, do I know CSS at all? That's what happens to a lot of people, and don't worry, this is very normal. Even if you are a master, even if you are many years down the line into CSS, you still start feeling that, okay, this is a new CSS challenge, let me work on it. That's what makes CSS even more amazing, because every new layout is a challenge, right? Every new thing, every time you're faced with, okay, what should I do now? What's the property I need to use, or how do I position this element, how do I make it look exactly like that, how do I make it responsive, and so much more. So let's see what the flow of this whole webinar is going to be. I will first talk about what makes CSS layouts so challenging. So I'll touch upon the pain points of what people go through, so that you feel, oh my god, okay, so I'm not alone in this. Everybody faces this, is it? That's what you're going to realize. Second thing, we'll talk about some of the CSS properties that actually help making layouts. Third one, we'll try to arrive at an approach that you can use as reference when you go blank. Fourth point, we'll see how to deal with some common challenges, just quickly do something like that. And last, if you have any questions, do type them right away in the live chat. Whenever you come across, you can type them in the live chat and I'll address them at the end of the session. So now when we start, what makes CSS layouts so challenging? Firstly, I just checked on Quora that there was a question of how many CSS properties exist, and you won't believe there are 520 plus CSS properties alone, by which I mean width and height and color, display and position, etc. And these are just properties. Each of them have so many other values, right? Default values, and hence so many different behaviors. How would you even remember 520 properties and how they behave, when to use what, and so many such things. Also, the challenge is that different elements behave differently. For example, you place, you set a height to an image, it appears at that height, but you can't set a height to a paragraph element, correct? You can set it to a div, but not a link maybe. Then when you add two A tags one after the other, they appear next to each other, but when you add two divs one after the other, they appear one below the other. So it's not very evident at the first go of how exactly each element behaves. Then let's say this whole famous float property, right? You apply float to one element, but you see that all other elements on the page have got messed up now. And then you try to alter one element, you just want it to move by some pixels, but somehow you feel everything is linked and everything goes for a toss. And if this isn't enough, you make everything looking perfect on the desktop side. You try to resize, you use responsive tools, and you start noticing that it all breaks on mobile side, it all breaks a tablet layout. Let's say you get even that perfect, you add media queries required, you do everything to make it completely responsive, and send across the link to your friend, and he or she says it's not working on his or her system the way you expect it to, or maybe on mobile, it's on the actual handheld device, it's different. So all of these challenges are there, and all I spoke about is how to get it done. Now CSS doesn't even throw any errors, right? You don't see anything red or black or something appearing on the screen. You will still see the website, you will still see all the elements, just that it's not looking the way you want it to. That's the major problem with CSS. Also, there is no one single right solution for a layout, for a challenge. There are multiple ways to do it, and all will actually give you the same outlook. Now these are just challenges of CSS layouts that I spoke about. I didn't even talk about the specificity in CSS, or the cascading effect, or IDs, or classes, best practices, accessibility. I didn't even talk about customizing frameworks like Bootstrap or Tailwind. None of those. I didn't even talk about using Sass or BEM, and all those are so much more, because CSS layouts itself is such a huge topic, right? So in this video we will try to look at some of those challenges, or some ways how to make it right, or an approach that you can refer back, like I already said. Let's see by the end of this if you feel a slight bit better, a slight bit more confident of making CSS layouts. I think mission accomplished. Okay, so coming to CSS properties that actually help making layouts. To be honest, there are only these 4 properties that will help you achieve the layout that you want. I'm not talking about the font size, the colors, or the spacing as such, because they are very easy. Anybody getting started can quickly figure out the font size. You just try various font sizes, you can get it right. Colors is actually even more easy, and all those things. Those properties are not the ones that are challenging, but it is these 4, that is display, position, float, and table. Also, if you are if you just started learning CSS, obviously you don't use tables at all for making a layout. Table is used only when you really need an actual table where you're showing some data in a spreadsheet format. Otherwise you don't even use table. So we can cleanly eliminate that, and we have only 3 properties to focus on. Also, with CSS3, with the coming of flexbox and grid, very rarely we use even the float property. It comes handy at times, but not for making layouts anymore, not for making those complex layouts. So you don't even have to focus on float. You are lucky, because maybe 6-7 years ago we used to use floats for everything, and those who are 6-7 years and plus experienced, they are experts at floats and clearing floats, and using them everywhere. Even today, even without flexbox, we can get things working the way we want. Next comes position. Yes, many people face an issue here. I will try to address this a few minutes later, of how to kind of make position easy. In case I forget to address that, please remind me. And now comes the display. I came from bottom to top, because display covers almost everything that is really required, starting from display block, display inline block, display inline, and going up to flex, and grids and so much more, right? This covers almost everything that is needed for layouts. In a way, you can feel better that it's only these properties that you have to master overall. Of course, there are so many sub properties that you'll have to take care of, but at least it's a good start. We don't have to think about 520 plus properties to begin with, correct? Now, let's see. You must have watched so many tutorials, you must have read about blog posts, you might have watched YouTube videos, you might have taken courses, you might have practiced a lot, but everywhere you will come across tutorials or documentation for how a particular property works. What are its various options, what are the syntax, and what happens when you use something. This is how all tutorials approach anything about CSS. But the actual problem is you don't know when to use what. You don't know how to approach it. Like, given a web page layout, given a Figma design, where do I start? How do I start? How do I know, am I doing it right? Okay, it does look right, but is this the way everybody that people very new to CSS face? Or these are the questions even 1-2 years experienced people face, that is this a scalable solution? Is this going to work on all browsers? All these questions you are faced with, correct? And now let's see if we can arrive at an approach that can help you a little. Okay, so let's talk about that. When a designer gives you a mock-up, or when you decide to make a clone of a website, something that you find really amazing, and you'll think, let me put my CSS skills to real test, okay? Or you look at dribble shots and you feel, let me try and design this, my CSS skills will improve, I'll be able to create some amazing layouts. When you do that, when you're given with a design, how do you first start? What's the first thing that you do? Okay, for instance, let's take this as an example. This is a part of the mock-up that I was given for building a website very recently, just a part, and this was given in Figma. So the moment you look at this, you don't have to get overwhelmed, you don't have to start thinking. Of course, your mind starts telling, hey, I can use flexbox here, probably I need to use float here, I need to use this. Don't overwhelm yourself with the complete design. No. Consider this like the Lego blocks. Have all of you played Lego blocks in your childhood? You have so many of those miniature items as single blocks, individual blocks, and you're presented, you probably make a castle using that, or you make a house, you make a building, or you make something like a vehicle. We all have played those, assume, and this is the output you need to build, and you need to do that element by element. So many tutorials that you watch might approach this in a way that they first write the entire HTML. So they add these section tags, h1 and images and everything. So if you see here, maybe there are about 12 to 14 HTML elements that you would add one after the other, and then go to the CSS style sheet and then start styling them. Now this is great if you are an expert at CSS already. If you have done so many websites, this is the best approach probably, because HTML elements is what makes up the main structure, right? But if you're new to it, making a complete HTML part and then coming to CSS is not the best approach. The way I do it even today is take it element by element. I add an element in HTML, I switch to the CSS file, I add styles to it, I come back, add another element and do it. That way you can really visualize it taking shape in front of you. You gain some confidence. Oh, this part is working. Okay, 10% is working, and you don't have to bother about the remaining HTML elements that are unstyled, because they look a little cluttered, right? An unstyled say paragraph, it's from left to right, it's flowing, and you want flexbox to make 5 columns like this, but without adding CSS at the beginning, they all come one below the other. For me personally, I don't like it at all to start like that. So if this approach works for you, works for me, I'm sure it does work for you as well. So what do you do when you look at this design? The very first thing is this complete blue block that you see at the bottom. So in a Lego blocks, if you had to build some building, you'll obviously start from the floor, right? You'll start with the most layer that is at the bottommost. So here also consider this like layers, and the bottommost layer probably is the HTML section, this whole background blue that you see. Now you can use section element, which is probably semantically right, but it's okay. If you're starting out, you can even start out using div and later make sure you just learn the semantic tags. That's it. So I would first make a div element in HTML. I will just say div class, section, some section, or section class, whatever name I give it to this, and that's all is the HTML I will do. I go to my style sheet and then give it a width, give it a height, and give it a background color. So I have the blank slate, I have the background ready now. Next, what will I do? The next thing you need to do is come from top to bottom. Yes, this does sound obvious, but you need to take it that way. So you'll just have to focus on this first. Okay, just these two elements, and how do I make them look great on desktop and mobile as well? So whenever you're making responsive websites, because that's what we all make today, there's no way you can just make a desktop site and end with it, because it's not going to work. You are definitely going to make responsive websites. When you do that, I suggest do it section by section. Like this part that you take, you make it completely perfect and then proceed to the other part which is below. That way you're not going to mess up other things when you go to mobile site version and things like that. Now looking at this small section that's in front of you, there are many different things that might come to your mind. I can do this using margins, maybe use a negative margin. I can do this using flex. I can do this using the position property. I can just position absolute this particular image here, or you might be thinking I can use a float. So the first property that comes to your mind is probably the one you're most comfortable with, correct? But I would suggest take it step by step. So first see, is this possible to achieve without using any of floats or flexbox or anything? No, right? You have to put them one next to the other, and it's not going to be possible. Now this whole section is one div maybe, and this is another div. So we just have these two elements. What's inside is after that. So when you have to place this yellow, let's call it an oval itself, this yellow oval here, and this particular I don't know what to call it, but this image, it's actually an image on the left. What do you start with? First see, is it possible using margins? Like you put this element first, after that you put this image, and then you'll have to just do a margin top, some negative value like minus 150 pixels or something, and you can achieve this look. But then ask yourself, is this the best approach? Maybe not, because this would be the best approach if you're making only the desktop site, but you're not going to be doing that. When this comes to a mobile site, you'll have to add breakpoints to make sure that the negative margin is reducing, because this oval will reduce in height, correct? So then the margin also has to reduce in height, which means you'll have to add more breakpoints and there's more work to it. So this is not the best approach. Number one, margin solution ruled out. Come to the next one, which is either float or position. Now can this be done using float? Yes, definitely you can float that to the left, and maybe do some positioning with this oval, but again slightly more challenging, because you have to make sure you clear the float after it, and you have to give a padding, you have to set some margins, which again you have to adjust with each breakpoint, right? Can this be done? So I would rule out even float. Okay, next, coming to position. Can this be achieved with position? Yes, definitely. Now just assume that you don't have this left side image, If you have only the oval, it's easy, right? You just put a margin auto so that it centers, and you put a background image or something like that, because assuming that you're giving this oval image, you put a background image and you put this text, and this image is what you would position absolutely with respect to the parent element. Now if you know position, then this is really the perfect solution, because you can make the parent div position relative, because that's the most important. I'll again probably elaborate on this a little later. And this can be positioned to the left, top 0, and left maybe a few pixels, but on mobile maybe you can even eliminate this image entirely depending on the mockup that's given to you. That's one of the solution. Yes, it's possible to do it using position, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that approach. Next, can you use flex for this? Yes, definitely you can use flexbox for this. You can make this div appear in between. You can have an imaginary blank div, but then you'll have to give it a width, because flex is more focused on content, and here you can do it, and you can use all the flex properties to make it look like this, like flex basis. You can give a flex basis of 2 and 1 here and 1 here and so on. Probably a good solution. But coming to the most latest easiest way of doing things is the grid. I also very recently discovered grid, and it feels great, because so many struggles that we face using floats and position and so much more is solved a lot to a large extent using grids, because the moment you see it, you can see grids, right? You can visually divide this is probably one block, and this is maybe 2 blocks, and this is 1, or you can say 1, 3 and 1. So the moment you're able to visualize a grid, you will definitely be able to use display grid and make this appear perfectly. All you need to know is the concept of grid itself, and it's really easy. You can check up Traversy Media's tutorial for CSS grids, because that has really helped me. It covers the most basic and fundamentals of CSS grid. It doesn't go too advanced, but that's really sufficient according to me. So I spoke about the approach. Do you remember? The first thing you need to check is, can I do this using the normal flow of the web page, which is one below the other? No, this cannot be done. So what next? Next is using negative margins. Now that's possible for just maybe a button or just a slight image that has to move little bit upwards compared to the normal flow. You can do it, but otherwise try to rule out margins. Third one is, can I do this using float? Then again, if there are not too many elements involved, yes, you can do it using float, but consider responsiveness when you're doing this, and make sure you use the clear property right after float if you're doing that. And then comes the position property, and when it comes to position, you'll need to know whether to use absolute positioning or relative positioning. You also need to know that you need to set a position for its immediate parent element, or whichever parent element that you're planning to place it within. You have to set the position element of that parent element. You cannot forget that. Then if you're comfortable with flex, go ahead, great. But with flex, there comes a slight problem of, you might not be able to achieve the exact width as compared to grid. Grid is more focused on the structure, and flex is more focused on the content. Having said that, let's see some more examples. Okay, now coming to the further section of this. Now again, just consider this part where there are two badges like this and recognized by. Now this is perfectly achieved using flexbox. As simple as that. You just have to give justify items, and you can reduce the space, whatever that value is. It's not occurring to my mind right now. Anyway, so this can be done using flexbox, and this view certificates, it's a simple margin auto, right? Coming to this, it's greatly done using either flexbox. If you don't want the elements to be equal width, rather you want the element to be focused on the width of the content here, then go ahead with flex. Otherwise, if you want them like 20% width for each, then you use CSS grids. So that's the only difference between, main difference between flex and grid. So that's about this example. Let's move further, which is this. I have just picked up some examples from Frontend Mentor. If you want to practice a lot of CSS layouts, I absolutely recommend this website, Frontend Mentor. You can sort out different challenges based on newbie or junior, intermediate, expert. You can download the challenges, you can build on them, you can submit the solution, and I guess you can even get a feedback. And there are a lot of YouTube tutorials as well, solving particular challenges, so you can see what approach somebody else has used. Okay, so this is one of the most basic, I think I would say, newbie challenge on Frontend Mentor. So like I said, I would first achieve this gradient here. And today gradients are not very difficult to achieve. There are gradient generators and so many things. Anyway, that topic is not CSS layouts, so I wouldn't focus on that. But that's the first thing I would do. And then comes this block here, and comes the most famous question of how do you center any element within the page, vertically centered and horizontally centered. So there are many jokes on the internet about this particular issue, right? And we have seen that, we have also seen famous, we have also seen popular solutions that it can be easily done using flex. You just set display flex to the parent element and just set, justify item center and align items, middle or whatever. So that can be done with this div. But what about these two sections? So then you need to think whether you're going to be using float here, whether you're going to be using display or position or flexbox or grid. So coming to this section, float is not the best option again, because this image has to be stretched across exactly to the width of, exactly to the height of these FAQs, and it has to be responsive, etc. Float is mostly eliminated for most of the layouts, but then you can easily use flex. But the only problem is this image is outside of this div, right? So this can be achieved using negative margin, because it doesn't come within the border, it goes a little outside. It can be achieved using negative margin for the image, or within this container you can absolutely position the image and give a negative value for the left. So things like that. So take up these challenges and approach them step by step by what I said. So negative margin, position, floats, flexbox, grid. This is the thing that should run on your mind. Going to the next example here. Something like this, again another challenge on particular design that you see. It's actually pretty simple to look at, and you will be wondering, can this easily be done with margins? Yes, this time I would recommend doing this with margins. You can add, you can have 3 divs, one below the other, and then use margins to position this. Don't use flexbox in my opinion for this. But this section here can be done using flexbox, or you can even use grid and then probably push them up and down using margins once again. This is just another example to show you. Coming here, this is looking at it, you might immediately wonder, there are so many elements very weirdly positioned. How do I go about it? Don't worry, this purple background that you see, this whole thing is an image. So the right part entirely is an image, and this is an image, this also is an image, which you have to use as background for a particular div and then make it appear. Or you can even use position absolute if you know how to do it. So this is a challenge I would really recommend to begin with. And there's also overlapping div elements, correct? So you'll have to adjust with things like overflow, and it's quite amazing in my opinion to do this challenge. It can again be done using float, but flexbox is better here you might not see obvious grids, right? So don't use grid for this. You can use flexbox and negative margins to move this a little to the right. That's how I would probably do it. And again, remember, there is no one solution that would probably work for everything. You'll have to consider, is this scalable? Like, let's say tomorrow I don't have 5 lines, I just have 2 lines, because this appears to be a slideshow, right? You can see 2 arrows here. So, and this is maybe a testimonial section. So not every single testimonial will have 5 lines. Something might have 2 lines, something might have 8 lines. So you can't assume that this is the length of this paragraph. That's something you need to consider. So when you arrive at a solution, when you arrive that okay, flexbox is what I'm going to use, make sure you don't use any fixed heights, like maybe 120 pixels or 200 pixels or 30 em, nothing like that. Don't do that, because the moment you're presented with a little more text, your design is not going to be scalable. So that's what you need to think. So if there are changes with the size of the image, or if there are changes with the content length, will my solution still work? Because you shouldn't have to touch CSS again. Once you've designed it, the design part is separate, the content part is separate. So you should be able to separate it like this. And let's say you are they change this background image to something else, even that should fit in your design. That's how you should be able to think. So that's the first question. Is my design, is my solution dependent on the content? As much as possible, as far as possible, it should not be. Okay. And number 2, can it be easily responsive? Which is why I say, after you complete each section on the web page, you immediately make it responsive, so that if your solution is not correct, if your solution is not working in the best way, if you're adding too many breakpoints and changing too many things to make it responsive, then that's a sign that this is probably not the best solution. So you can try something else, or maybe some layouts don't have an easy solution. Maybe it does have to have that many breakpoints. If that's the case, great. But do think, is there an alternative solution to make it responsive in a better way and to separate it from the content? These are the 2 things you need to remember to check whether your solution is the best. Okay. And again, even then, there won't be a single solution. It can be done. Another developer might do it in a completely different way. But as long as the answer to these 2 questions is yes, it is scalable and it can be responsive, you can proceed happily without having to worry, why did he choose that solution? That's okay. So coming to the next design, something like this. This is again very famous Frontend Mentor challenge, I believe, and it has 4, forget this part, it's very simple. Coming to these 4 blocks here, okay, the moment you see it, I'm not sure which approach comes to your mind. It can be done using inline block as well, and then you push these 2 elements using margin or something like that. But you can also use flexbox, where you use this as one section, one div, this middle thing is another div, and then have 2 more divs like this, and the third one like this. But according to me, the easiest solution would be using grids. So if you have come across CSS grid, you know that the elements can scan across multiple rows and multiple columns. It's like merging in an Excel spreadsheet. You all have used Excel spreadsheet, right? And you can take multiple rows and columns and say merge these cells. That's how grid works. So there are a lot of these Excel spreadsheets. You can have as many of them as you want, and you can merge the columns, you can merge the rows, you can merge the rows and columns to make any desired grid output that you want. So to visualize this as a grid, I have just made something like this. This is how it's done. So do you see this? And this is divided into 3 columns, 4 rows. And once you do this, it's very easy. You do this, saying grid column, and it will be like 2 to 4, whatever that is, grid column maybe 1 to 2, and grid row 2 to 4. And this would be grid column 2 to 3 and grid row 1 to 3 and so on. It's very simple. It can be achieved in no time if you are an expert at grid, and it's also perfectly responsive and it's not dependent on the content. So let's say you have much longer paragraph here and you have just a few words in this block. It doesn't matter because grid takes fixed width and fixed height. It's more focused on the layout, right? And within this the image can be positioned absolutely, and that's not a problem. But these blocks are best achieved using grid. It's responsive also without any problem. You just have to remove the display grid on mobile sizes, or if you're starting mobile first, you don't have to apply display grid for mobile screens, and only after a particular width, like say 768 pixels or something, you'll have to add display grid and all the things I mentioned, and you have this layout easily achievable. Okay, coming to the next example, this is a classic example of grid. The moment you see it, if you know grid, you will not think about another solution, another way of achieving this. Of course, it can be done using Flexbox, but then you'll have multiple nested divs to do that, and then style them separately, add different classes, and you have to take care of so much more. But with grid, this is how, if you visualize this right, then perfect. You are already not junior, you are definitely an intermediate if you're able to visualize this. So this first div spans across two of these grid cells, and the second one is one, and this spans across two rows. This is how it's done. Again, this can be done within no time if you practice grids enough. Okay, this was another example I wanted to show. And coming to this, yes, this again can be achieved using grid, but it's not as easy as this, as simple as this, because here we could divide it into equal fraction boxes. So 25% and 4 boxes, 1 FR, right? That's how it is. But here you can make it say 3 FR, 3 FR, and then 1 FR, and then 3. Right, it's not very evident the moment you look at it, so it's okay if you're not able to do this using grid. There's always another solution. You can use Flexbox here. Okay, you can use 2 separate divs, one for the first section and one for the second section, and do it. Or you can even use 2 grids and make this 60% and 40%, make this 30%, 40%, 30% if you're not able to do this. Like I said, there's no one perfect solution, but as and when you practice more, you will arrive at better and easier solutions, which is well understood as well, and also has less number of HTML elements and maybe shorter lines of CSS code, right? So coming to the next, I'll not take questions yet. I have few more things to address. So this was about an approach to take, that the questions to ask yourself. Most of the time, if it's very simple, margins can be used to shift some elements left or right. But if it's slightly more complicated, you can use float or you can use the position. Just that you should know what difficulties these two properties bring with. And if it's slightly more layouts, if it's large, something like you saw all these examples, then you definitely better use Flex or grid. It's better to learn both of them, and you will slowly understand with practice when to use Flex and when to use grid. The main difference with Flex and grid is that with Flex, the focus is more on the content. So if you're adding 2 paragraphs and you easily make it Flex, then the larger paragraph will occupy more width and the smaller paragraph will occupy less width. With grid, you can't do that easily, right? You don't know how much content is there. With grid, you can only give fractions. It's fixed. But with Flexbox, it's not fixed. That's why it's called Flexbox. It's flexible, right? But if you are sure that you want, yes, I want 25%, 25%, 25%, and that's how I want my layout to look, then grid is the way to go. Okay, so these 2 things I hope you understood. And coming to the common issues that you face, the number 1 question is how to center align any element on a page, which there are too many solutions for it, so I will not go to that. And the next two more things that you'll have to, I want to focus on is the float. When you use a float element, don't forget that once you set float, it's like you're telling that element to float, and every other element after it also starts floating. Now that's something you cannot forget. You're setting it only for one element, yes, but it's something like it's moved out of its space. Now everything else starts to fit into that place. That's where things get messed up. So if you want to float one element, float it, and make sure you clear float immediately after that. Now again, you can check for solutions online. There's something called as clear fix that you can add to a parent of the float element, and things are easily fixed. That's one challenge, but if you remember this, that with float comes clear, for sure you have to use clear, there is no other option, then you will remember it each time. Then the third point is positioning, absolute and relative positioning. Okay, now when you want to use position absolute on any element, say for example, on this particular layout, if you want to use position absolute for this image on the left, you have to set a position to its parent element, because you are setting this position based on its parent element's position, right? So not the entire page, you just want it to position correctly within this div. So this div, whatever it is, it might be invisible, whatever it is, has to have position relative, or that's the best way, because by default position is static, and if the position is static, you cannot absolutely or relatively position this. So first, whenever you're using position absolute, see that with respect to which div you're using position absolute, and to that div you have to immediately set position relative, otherwise the element disappears, or it's somewhere else on the page and you start wondering why did that happen. These are the common challenges or the common problems that people very new to CSS face, and once this is solved, like I said, you start getting confused when to use grid, when to use flex, but that again I solved it. And then starts some questions like, how do I achieve this? Now how do I achieve this particular layout in, say, using flex or grid? Now that comes with a lot of practice. Again, like I said, go to Frontend Mentor and start practicing right away. There are many more such websites as well, which you can simply Google Frontend Mentor alternatives and you can find many of those, or you can take dribble shots and start designing. There won't be anybody to give you feedback on that, but of course Twitter is there. You can post it, you can say this is my solution, can anybody give feedback, and there are a lot of people willing to do that for you. Or you can take existing websites and start cloning them without looking at the source code first, and obviously the source code is really readily available to you, so you can check how they have done it after you have done it. You can take small sections of it and start cloning website layouts. So having said this, I would like to take some questions now if you have any, and if you want to do more of this, let's say if you want me to take the next session's webinar, something related to grids or flex or something like that, please let me know in the comments, or you can also send a DM on Twitter. You can connect to me personally somehow and let me know that we want to see more of this, and I could take a next session on this. Let me see if there are any questions. Please let me know. Somebody has said most challenge is positioning, especially to know measurement. So that's where I said, if you're going by measurement, if you want something exactly placed like in fractions, say 20% or like 1/4, you want to occupy 1/4 width, whenever something like that appears, the first thing that should pop up in your head is I have to use grid for this. Okay, but if you're talking about measurement, like by how much percentage should I shift it or something, that only comes by experimenting. say you want to move an element by 50 pixels, you won't really know. You'll have to try it. It might be 50, it might be 100, unless you have actual specifications from the designer. But you can only achieve as much closest to the design as possible that's given to you. So that's about it. And if you like to connect to me, this is my website, shrutivalasar.com, and it's not updated with these webinars. I will really do that soon. Or Twitter is the best way. I'm most active there, so do follow me on Twitter. My personal handle, also Thyris handle, where I will be letting you know what's upcoming here. I have a lot of plans for this, all my YouTube videos and everything. You will be updated here. And of course, you are on YouTube, so don't forget to subscribe right away. Okay, thank you so much, and it was lovely talking to you all. Let me know in the comments below if there was any feedback. I'm very open to feedback, and I would want to improve in the future sessions as well. Thank you so much. Bye bye.